The canvas of memory is a strange thing. Some moments are painted in vibrant, impossible colors, sharp and clear as if they happened just yesterday. Others are smudged, a blur of shapes and feelings that you can barely make out. But what if one of those blurry, forgotten memories, what if it suddenly becomes so real it threatens to tear your entire world apart? It started with a box, a simple cardboard box tucked away in the back of my mother's attic. It was a chore, really, an obligation to clear out the junk before we sold the house. The air was thick with dust and the smell of old paper and things long forgotten. My mom, a woman whose life was a series of meticulously organized lists, had a whole system for her past. Everything was labeled, dated, and neatly filed away. Except for this box. This one just said miscellaneous in her elegant, looping handwriting. A word that usually meant junk, not important. But when I opened it, it felt like I was opening something else entirely. A tomb. Inside were all the relics of my childhood. Faded report cards, a chipped ceramic handprint from kindergarten, a tattered stuffed rabbit named Barnaby. And then there were the drawings. Hundreds of them, it seemed, all in a messy pile. I remembered this phase. I was obsessed with drawing as a kid. Crayon on construction paper, marker on notebook paper, even pencil on the margins of my math homework. I'd sit for hours, creating entire worlds. I smiled to myself, flipping through them. A wonky-looking sun with a smile, a stick figure family holding hands, a house with a disproportionately large chimney. All the usual stuff. Then I saw her. A girl. She appeared in drawing after drawing, a constant presence. Her hair was a shock of fiery red, drawn with a crayon so old it was almost orange. Her eyes were wide, and in every single picture, she was holding the same single yellow daisy. She was always on the edge of the frame, observing, a little bit sad. I remembered her. Sort of. My childhood imaginary friend. Her name was Lily. I used to tell my parents about her all the time. My mom would smile and say, "That's a nice story, sweetie." But my dad would get this strange, distant look in his eyes. A flash of something I could never quite place. I put the drawings aside, a nostalgic smile on my face. It wasn't until later that night, in my own quiet apartment, that the memory came rushing back. A specific, painful memory. I was 6 years old, and I was playing hide-and-seek with my parents. I found my dad hiding in the closet, and he was holding a little drawing. A drawing of Lily. "Who is this, honey?" he'd asked, his voice shaking just a little. "That's Lily," I'd said. "My friend." He'd smiled then, a tired, sad kind of smile, and said, "She's a good friend." I never thought anything of it. Until now. I went back to the box and pulled out a different pile of drawings. These were from when I was a teenager, a time when I thought I was far too mature for silly things like imaginary friends. The style was different now. Pen and ink more realistic. Darker. But there she was again. Lily. Her hair was a cascade of red, still a shock of color against the black and white. Her eyes were still wide, still had that same sadness. And she was still holding that same single yellow daisy. But something was different. She wasn't just observing anymore. In one drawing, she was a reflection in a puddle, watching me from below. In another, she was a ghostly figure standing behind me as I slept. In a third, she was peering out from the shadows of a forest, her face half hidden by a tree trunk. The more I looked, the more a knot formed in my stomach. These weren't the innocent drawings of a child. They were the unsettling, almost haunted sketches of a young girl trying to articulate something she couldn't understand. Something that was following her. And in every single drawing, right there in the corner, was the date. All of them dated between my 15th and 16th birthday. I felt a chill run down my spine. The Lily of my childhood was a sweet, smiling figure. The Lily of my teenage years, she was a specter. A warning. And the dates on the drawings didn't make any sense. I had no memory of drawing any of these after the age of 7. My dad had always told me I stopped drawing Lily when I was little. But the proof was right there in my own handwriting. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong, something hidden in the forgotten corners of my memory. It was like I was looking at a puzzle missing a crucial piece, a piece that my mind had intentionally thrown away. What was so traumatic that I would erase an entire year's worth of my own art? And who was this girl, this Lily, that she would haunt my drawings for so long? The simple, nostalgic chore of clearing out an attic had just become a terrifying descent into a past I didn't recognize. A past that my parents, it seemed, had worked very hard to hide from me. The drawing sat on my coffee table, a scattered deck of cards I was afraid to pick up. Each one felt like a key to a locked door I wasn't sure I wanted to open. But the feeling of dread had already taken root, a cold seed planted deep in my gut. It was no longer a question of whether to look, but how to look without losing my mind. My parents had always been so normal, so loving. A picture of suburban perfection. My dad, a quiet but firm engineer. My mom, a kind and gentle soul who gardened and baked cookies. The idea that they had a secret, a dark and consuming secret that involved me, was an idea my brain couldn't process. I started small. I drove back to my parents' house, not for answers, but for clues. I told my mom I'd left my phone charger there. She gave me that familiar, warm smile. "It's on the kitchen counter, honey." But as she turned away, I saw it. Just a brief flicker of her eyes. They were tired, worn down, and there was a shadow of fear in them that I'd never noticed before. I didn't grab the charger. I went to the old bookshelf in the living room, the one with all the family photo albums. My parents' lives were documented in these books, from their wedding day to my first day of school, all neatly arranged and labeled. I found the albums from my childhood, the ones with the red, fuzzy covers. I flipped through them, my heart pounding in my chest. The pictures were all there. My birthday parties, our family vacations, me on the monkey bars at the park. Everything seemed normal, until I reached the album from the year I was 6. The year my dad had found me in the closet. The year I now suspected everything changed. There were photos of me, but they were fewer, more spaced out. And in a number of them, a familiar flash of red hair in the background. It was always out of focus, a blur. In one picture, it looked like a girl standing behind a bush, just barely visible. In another, it looked like a fleeting shape in a reflection on the window pane. It was Lily. She was in the photographs, just like she was in the drawings. She wasn't an imaginary friend. She was real. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. My parents hadn't just humored a child's imagination, they had actively tried to hide a person. But who was she? And why would they do that? I remembered my dad's face when he saw the drawing of Lily, that sad, distant look. It wasn't sadness. It was guilt. Or maybe something even worse. I went back home, the album clutched in my hands, a desperate need for answers overriding my fear. I locked myself in my apartment, spreading the drawings out on the floor. I looked at the dark, unsettling sketches from my teen years again. The more I looked, the more a different kind of detail emerged. In the drawing of Lily behind the sleeping me, there was a small symbol on the wall. A circle with a star inside. A pentagram. A strange, occult symbol for a normal, suburban family. In the drawing of her in the forest, the tree trunk wasn't a tree at all. It was the gnarled, twisted wood of a very specific kind of tree. A sycamore. My dad's office was behind a sycamore tree in our backyard. He spent hours there. He never let me go in. I had always assumed it was just for work, for his engineering blueprints. But what if it was for something else entirely? I started to connect the dots, and the picture that was forming was a monstrous one. The drawings from my childhood were happy. They were of me and Lily playing in the park on the swings, eating ice cream. The drawings from my teenage years were of her watching me, of her as a reflection, a shadow. The dates on the teen drawings were from a period of my life I had no memory of. A gaping black hole in my mind. I called my mom, my voice trembling. "Mom," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Who is Lily?" The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. "Honey," she finally said, her voice strained. "Why are you asking about that now?" I told her about the drawings, about the dates, about the pictures in the photo album. She let out a soft sob. "I'm coming over," she said, her voice trembling. "Just don't do anything. Don't go anywhere." She arrived half an hour later, her face pale, her eyes red from crying. She sat on my couch, looking at the drawings spread out on the floor, and for the first time in my life, I saw her not as my mother, but as a person, a woman burdened by a secret she could no longer hold. She told me the story, her voice quiet and filled with pain. And it was a story far more terrifying than anything I could have ever imagined. It wasn't about an imaginary friend. It was about a sacrifice. A monstrous pact made long before I was ever born. My mother's words were a cold, hard stone in the pit of my stomach, each one chipping away at the foundation of my reality. She spoke in a hushed, trembling voice, as if the walls themselves had ears. The story was a tapestry woven with desperation, grief, and a promise made to a presence that lurked just beyond the veil of our world. It started with my parents' struggle to have a child. For years, they tried. Years of disappointment, of failed treatments, of the crushing weight of hope turning to ash. The doctors had told them to give up, that it was a lost cause. My mother's grief had been a palpable thing, a shadow that followed her everywhere. My dad, ever the pragmatist, had seemed to handle it better on the surface. But my mom said he was secretly obsessed. He'd spent late nights in his study, researching ancient texts, forgotten folklore, anything that offered a glimmer of a different kind of hope. That's when he found it. Or rather, when it found him. An old, dusty book at a rare book dealer's, bound in what looked like human skin. My mom said she'd pleaded with him to get rid of it. But he was past listening. He was desperate. And the book spoke of an ancient entity, a benevolent but demanding spirit that existed in a parallel reality, a reality of pure thought and emotion. It was a place of endless possibility, where things could be conjured into existence by a powerful enough mind. This entity, the book said, could grant a wish. But the price was steep. It wasn't gold or jewels. The price was a life. My father, in a moment of unimaginable despair, made a bargain. He would use his own life force to conjure a child, a daughter, from this other place. The entity would bring her into our world, fully formed, as if she had always been a part of it. But there was a catch. The process would be slow, a gradual transfer of being. And the vessel for this transfer, that would be my mother. But not as a mother. As a host. A temporary home for a soul that wasn't hers. A soul that had to be drawn, to be visualized, to be manifested. My father spent months meticulously drawing this girl. He drew her with red hair because it was a color of life and fire. He drew her holding a yellow daisy, the flower of new beginnings. He drew her with wide, sad eyes because he knew what he was asking her to leave behind. He called her Lily. My mom, despite her fear, would watch him, her heart breaking for her husband's madness. She would pray. She would beg him to stop. But the drawings became more and more frequent, more and more detailed. And then, one day, my mother found out she was pregnant. I wasn't a child born of human biology alone. I was a drawing brought to life. A girl willed into existence by a desperate man's pact with a shadow. My mom said the moment I was born, a strange energy filled the room. The doctors dismissed it as an old wives' tale, but she knew. She had brought a ghost into the world. The first 6 years of my life were a struggle. My parents tried to raise me as a normal child, but my father was consumed by a quiet paranoia. He was obsessed with me drawing, with me creating. He wanted me to keep drawing Lily, my imaginary friend, because he believed the act of drawing was the bridge between our world and hers. It kept the transfer of my being complete. It kept me from fading back into the place I came from. But then, the drawing stopped. The transfer, my mom said, was complete. I was a real girl. But Lily hadn't completely disappeared. Her consciousness, a faint echo of the being I was born from, still lingered. It was dormant, a ghost in my mind, an imprint on my soul. A shadow on the edges of my vision. My parents, thinking they had finally defeated the entity, locked the drawings away, never to be seen again. They never talked about it. They made me forget. My father, in a moment of emotional vulnerability, told me he was happy I had a friend named Lily, a friend in my heart. He never told me she was my origin. But the entity didn't forget. It waited. And when I was 15, the pact reactivated. It was subtle at first. I would find myself drawing, my hands moving on their own. I would wake up in the middle of the night, my sketchbooks filled with unsettling, dark images of a red-haired girl watching me. I wasn't just drawing Lily, I was drawing my own memories, memories of a life that wasn't mine. Memories of the world I was born from, a world of shadows and reflections. The drawings were a warning. The entity was trying to pull me back, to reclaim what my father had stolen. The dark drawings, my mother explained, were the essence of the entity itself, trying to remind me of where I came from. She said my dad had found me in the closet that day, not because I was hiding, but because I was drawing. I was drawing a girl with red hair, the same girl he had drawn years before. And he had a flash of the same guilt and despair in his eyes that he had felt when he made the deal. He knew that the pact wasn't over, that the girl I was coming back to reclaim me. The story hung in the air between us, a suffocating presence. My mother was shaking, tears streaming down her face. "He sacrificed himself," she whispered, her voice a ghost of a sound. "Your father, he saw the entity in a vision, an old, ancient thing that had granted his wish, and it told him the pact wasn't over. It was coming for you. It was going to pull you back. He couldn't let that happen." I remembered the last time I saw my dad. He was in his study, the door locked. I had heard him muttering to himself, his voice frantic, desperate. My mom said he was making the final drawing, the final sacrifice. He was drawing himself out of existence. He was severing the link. It was the night of my 16th birthday. My dad had given me a small, wrapped box. Inside was a tiny, intricately carved yellow daisy. "To remind you of new beginnings, my sweet girl," he'd said, his eyes filled with a love and a sorrow I had never understood until now. He had drawn himself out of the world, a trade for my life, his existence for mine. He had walked into the forest behind our house, into the clearing with the sycamore tree, and he had never come back. The police found his car, his wallet, his keys. But his body was never recovered. My mom and I had told ourselves he had run away, that he had abandoned us. The pain of that lie, it had been a familiar ache for years. But the truth was so much worse. He hadn't abandoned me. He had saved me. My mom pointed to one of the teen drawings, the one of the shadowy figure peering out from the forest. "He was saying goodbye," she said, a new wave of sobs racking her body. "He was leaving a message. That he was going to the other side. That he was going to face it." The drawings were my father's way of communicating. The dark, unsettling sketches were not a sign of my own psychosis. They were his last desperate attempt to warn me, to show me the battle he was fighting, a battle he ultimately lost. They were my memories, not of my life, but of my father's final days, of his descent into the madness of a pact he couldn't break. I was looking at his life through the prism of a shared consciousness. He was letting me in, letting me see the truth of who I was, so that one day, I would know the truth of what he did. My mother got up and walked over to the box. She pulled out a smaller, sealed envelope. "He left this for you," she said, her voice filled with a finality that scared me. "He said you would know when it was time to open it." Inside the envelope was a single piece of paper, folded into a perfect square. It was a drawing, not of Lily, but of me. It was a simple pencil sketch. Me as a little girl, with a smile on my face, playing in a field of yellow daisies. The date was scribbled on the bottom, my 16th birthday. And in his familiar, elegant script were 2 words. "You're safe." My father had made the final drawing not to sacrifice himself, but to finish the transfer. He had drawn me, happy, whole, in our world, with no lingering connection to the place I had come from. The entity, the shadowy specter, no longer had a hold on me. My father had paid the final price. He had made me real. He had given me a life. I looked at the drawing, tears blurring my vision. All those years, I had held a memory that wasn't mine, a painful echo of a man's final, heroic act. The girl in my childhood drawings was real, but she wasn't me. She was the shadow of who I could have been, a ghost of an existence that never was, an imprint of a different world my father had fought to save me from. And the real girl, the one who was truly me, was the one on the piece of paper in my hand. A girl in a field of yellow daisies, safe and sound. If you found this story as chilling as I did, if it made you question the very nature of memory and reality, then you know what to do. Like this video to help us bring more stories like this to light. Subscribe so you don't miss our next descent into the dark and the mysterious. And hit that little bell icon, turn on notifications, because trust me, you won't want to miss what we uncover next. And maybe, just maybe, take a moment to look at your own childhood drawings. You never know what might be hiding in them.